Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Indian Embassy, Ambassador of India, Shri Akhilesh Mishra ji, I welcome you all on another episode of India-Ireland Friendship Lecture Series and welcome our today's guest, Dr. Colm, Director of Center for Young Talent, which is based in Dublin City University, and it is the largest center for talented children in Europe. The objective of this center is to provide school-going children a glimpse of the courses available at university level and in the process help them understand their liking and passion so that they can choose their right path for their future. In today's presentation, Dr. Colm will be sharing more information about this center. To begin the program, I would request His Excellency Ambassador of India, Shri Akhilesh Mishra ji, to kindly give his introductory remarks.
Namaskar. Thank you, Himaji, for organizing this program. My dear friends, welcome to the Embassy. Professor Dr. O'Reilly, very warm welcome to the Indian Embassy, and also my greetings to friends who are joining virtually and also benefiting from this program later. We have, friends, launched this India-Ireland Friendship Lecture Series with the objective of spreading information about a lot of positive developments happening in India and also happening in Ireland. There are a lot of innovations I see wherever I go in Ireland in different fields. Similarly, India is also the fastest growing economy, and also the pace of transformation of India, socio-economic and technological, is mind-boggling even for us Indians who have been very closely following developments back home. It's very, very fascinating transformation. And education sector is particularly very important for India because India has not only the world's largest population, but also India has a very young demography. And also the trend is already visible that India is going to play a very, very central, critical role in supply of professional manpower, technical manpower, skilled manpower to rest of the world, because North America, Europe, Russia, China, Japan, South Korea, the whole developed countries belt is experiencing aging population and shrinking labor force and growing dependency ratio. So India is the only country which stands as a bright spot in terms of very highly skilled manpower and also enough supply. We are producing about 41-42 million university graduates every year. By 2030, it is expected that India will account for 1/4 of the university graduates produced worldwide. So this is very, very important area. And also in terms of the challenges that it creates for India is also mind-boggling, because we have very large number, and also the world economy is transforming very rapidly. So education has to not only keep pace with the society, but also in terms of it has to be foresighted to plan maybe 4 years, 5 years, 10 years in advance of the transformation outside. And that is why I am very keen to facilitate two-way sharing of ideas in education sector, and also all segments of education, not just the tertiary education, but also younger level children education. This is very, very important. And I'm very happy to learn more and more every day about Ireland's great innovation success story in education sector. We were very privileged to host a similar lecture by the Director of Institute of Education, and she gave us an overview of how remarkably Ireland leadership transformed education as the backbone, the foundation of transforming Ireland. And Ireland today is a very knowledge-driven society, and Irish universities are pride of the Europe in terms of the inherently globalized education that they provide. Their curriculum is cutting edge. the spirit of innovation that they inculcate in the students is very significant. So I was aware of the developments at the university level, but I was not aware of the ground level developments and innovations that Ireland has introduced very well. So in a program recently, I came to know about the special program that DCU has for very talented young children. And the family members, the parents, they were very delighted to participate in your initiative and benefit from your cutting edge innovative solutions that you are providing. So I thought it would be a good idea for broader community of Indians in Ireland to be made aware of what work you are doing. And as you know, we have a very vibrant Indian community, around 80,000 strong Indian community in Ireland. They are spread all over Ireland, all counties, and also maybe roughly half of them are Irish citizens now. So they have the young children who are they're born here, they are going to Irish schools. So this is a good community for us to to inform them about your excellent program. So I look forward to learning myself more, and then we can think about what next. One area naturally is if Indian community and their parents know about this program, I think they can participate more effectively. And also I do hope that your citywide program can be a model for many of Indian schools and Indian education system as a whole. So I think once we learn more about your methodology and what you are doing, I would love to meet you also to plan kind of more broader, deeper engagement between India and Ireland in this particular segment. And also, I must say, I'm already very fascinated by the methodology of education that Irish system follows. It's not just one lesson for all. You are going more towards student-centric education. Every student has a different needs, different capacity, and then that kind of flexible approach from the teacher side. Also, I'm very impressed by the Ireland's great initiative in teacher-centric education too. Because teachers are leaders, they guide. So, providing the right kind of skill sets and also right kind of mindset for the teachers, that is also a great area. So, with your leadership, in your experience, I think we have got a good catalyst for many interesting ideas to promote India-Ireland linkages. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Ambassador. Just so nice to hear so many positive things, I think, about student-centred education, teacher-centred education. You definitely, once your ambassadorial role finishes, there's a job in the Ministry for Education, I think, in Ireland, with this visionary approach to what we're trying to do. Usually when I start these talks, I give these talks all the time in various capacities to parents, to teachers, to students. I usually feel very smug because I'm going, we're the largest gifted program in Europe. We have 6,000 students a year. We've had 80,000 students who've gone through the program. But then I hear the numbers that the ambassador has just said there, and it feels very, very small what we've achieved to date. But it's really interesting, and in terms of Irish-India partnership, that from my fortunate nature of working on this program since it began in 1993, up until this date, as I've met many Indian students. Indeed, on the first year, there was a student who attended, an Indian student who was attending school in Limerick. He's still a good friend of mine. He's on our advisory board. He currently is a head of a really good not-for-profit in London at the moment. And again, Indian students have been integral to the development of this program, very much because, from my experience, they take education very seriously. And this is usually important. And they're also willing to try new things, to come on programs like this, to develop their potential and do different things. And that's such a wonderful experience. And it's great that I have one of my PhD students who's from India. Who's here today. And that's Aishwarya, and I'll explain what topic she's looking at. And it really is, kind of ties in exactly to what you were saying there. We've really moved beyond what we perceive this type of gifted education to be, which is this one-size-fits-all model that all these students just need is to, do extra work for 10 hours a day, and that will make them brilliant students and they'll all be very happy about it. We've found that we really need to look at these things totally differently, because a lot of these students present with such different profiles, and certain interventions need to be made in order for them to succeed, to reach their potential. I think it's our duty as educators, and particularly in an area which I'm very passionate about, to try and provide that platform for each individual students to succeed. And the model that we're looking at now is a real gifted 2.0 model, which is very student-centred to the different and various profiles of these students, which externally people might not imagine they have, and just perceive them as people who just want to study and learn all the time, which might be part of what they want to do, but it has to be tailored towards what they're interested in, to something they get value out of, and also to their overall development as people. And I think, again, we really need to look towards India as a good community for having balance in those things and making better citizens in that regard. So again, I'm delighted to come here to give this particular talk, because I definitely feel I'm preaching to an audience that understands where we're coming from, and hopefully we can learn some new things, because I really feel, from my own experience, I've worked at this field for 30 years, oh my god, I look so young, I know, but it's really because I kind of have seen it develop and grow, that really makes me very invested in its success and wanting it to be better and bigger in relation to that in the future. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do, and we need partners and people to come on and bring us along the way in that. And actually also, just before I start, I have recently published a paper with an Indian colleague, which we compared Irish and Indian students relative thing, and strangely enough, the experiences were very similar. So this is quite interesting in relation to what we're finding, that the community, the challenges and difficulties that face are universal. They're not just existent to one particular country. Some countries obviously make them more difficult than others, but generally the student experiences and the problems that they face or the challenges that they need to overcome are quite universal for gifted students, and hopefully we'll talk about them. Maybe not resolve all of them today, but we'll certainly put them out there to talk about how we can resolve them. Okay, so in terms of what I'm going to talk about, and again, look, if there's anything that you kind of are confused about or that I don't feel I'm explaining well enough, please just let me know or interrupt me. That won't disrupt me in any way. It'll help me to know you haven't fallen asleep or anything. So I'm just going to talk about, it helps me to try to understand what we're trying to do. So, and various audiences like various things better. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're defining giftedness in general in the field now, which has changed. Talk a little bit about the needs of high ability students, which really are something that maybe might give a scope for thought into how we relate and deal with them. An overview of the work that we're doing at the centre, a little bit about what we now have, which is high ability students with learning difficulties, which are really making up a much larger percentage of a gifted population than, say, when I started, where they were virtually non-existent. And disadvantaged students too, and again, when we started, we just weren't identifying these students. We weren't going into these communities to get them on board. And again, with a country so large as India, where there's so many difficult challenges for people in various regions, this is such an important area to look at. Research, we do a lot of it, we talk about it, and we're trying to build. The great thing about these programs is that we can implement research into practice. That I have a direct link to what I do our research on, to saying, we can make people's lives or experiences better by the results of this research, as opposed to it never being used or being something that we'll cite in a PhD but never read it. This is something I'm very kind of wanting to develop research that's relevant to what we're actually doing. So as I said, Ashwari's looking at gifted students with autism. I've had people using PhDs on gifted disadvantaged students, gifted LGBTQ students. These are much part of the community who are undervalued and underserved, and we need to kind of integrate that and create best practice for them. So that's why I like what our research agenda is, rather than just doing something that is very broad and vague and is very difficult to implement. Teacher training, it's really important, as I said. We find, and this is where, I'm giving the big reveal to the end, is that teachers who are actually trained in this field serve these students better than ones who aren't. That's not a surprise, but the surprise is that there's very few programs in teacher training at initial or continuous service level to improve them. And a lot of our models that teachers use on gifted students is based on their experiences of gifted students that they've come across before, which might not be valid, or might be a school remembrance of somebody who didn't quite fit in, didn't quite succeed, and sure, let's move on from that. So it's a lot different to what we want now, is to understand these students better. And finally, hopefully, some recommendations for what might work best for these students, and we're talking about in your own lives for how you can implement change, or what you can do to make things better for yourself or for people who might fall into the category. So, hopefully we're mostly familiar with the normal curve of intelligence, okay? So the normal curve there is an IQ scale that has been used for many, many years, for better or for worse, to measure the intelligence of individuals. And the idea would be, and again, these things are changing or a little bit malleable these days, but the average IQ is normally in the middle of students of 100. And what we found latterly, or like as I say, in a modern way of thinking, because previously we weren't really looking at any of these things at all, we were excluding everybody from this side and not integrating into school and doing very little with people on this side. So thankfully, we've changed that system, and we're now devising lots of models for inclusion for people on the left side of the scale. But we still haven't resolved what we're doing with people on the other side. We're still often integrating the same models that we used when we were excluding the special needs students. And this is something that we need to categorically change, because if you look at that curve of intelligence, if you have people who are 2 standard deviations away from the middle on this side, of course we're going to have integration, and we're going to have some interventions to allow them to succeed in a regular school, because we don't want to exclude them. But if we have students who are 2 standard deviations away from the norm in an intelligent capacity, we still expect them to function on the mainstream without any interventions. And this, to me, is kind of cruel when you think of it, because why are their experiences completely different to people who are 2 standard deviations below? And this is why programs that we would run, or implementations that were needed, are necessary for these particular students. So these are kind of a bit wordy and long in relation to things, but it kind of, to me, the reason I use this 3, there's no real universal definition of giftedness. I use 3 kind of models because they kind of incorporate what we're thinking. The Irish currently guidelines models, although I will say the Department of Education currently has a new working group, of which I'm part of, thankfully, to have new guidelines and more modern, because obviously we've changed a lot since 2007, where the guidelines were implemented originally and haven't been changed since. But they really are people who require opportunities for enrichment and extension beyond those normally provided for regular students. And I think that that's something that people sometimes miss. Because when we're teaching, we think, well, everything in the curriculum suits these students. Yet we have a definition that says it actually doesn't. We need to extend the curriculum because these students need something more. And they need something more valuable or more in depth than they're currently getting. So we need to modify what we're doing. But whereas people seem to think, well, the solution to that is just give them extra questions of the same stuff that they know already. Sure, that's extra work. But it's not really. That's only extra stuff that they know already. And the real learning from that is, oh, I'll just go slower the next time because my reward will be extra work of stuff that I know already. So what we want to do is extra work is fine, but it has to be defined to what the interested student has, and it has to be extra to what they've previously done to learn more. And I think Deborah Eyre, who I know quite well, her definition is quite one that we will be mostly familiar with. Look, it's one who has the ability to achieve in advance of their peer group. And I think sometimes we're afraid to say that because we're afraid to say, well, everybody's equal. But they're not really. In sports, there's people who compete at a very high level. In music, there's people who compete at a very high level. In art, there's people who perform at a very high level. And the same with academia. There's people who are just better and quicker at learning than other people. And kind of saying, well, we'll just lead them to it, isn't really the best solution to that. what we actually do is embrace that and go, wow, that's very fortunate, what are we going to do with it? As opposed to the model that currently exists is, well, you'll find out later that you'll slow down. So keep going as you are, but we're not going to do anything to help you along the way. And then you'll find out it'll even up. Well, of course it would even up if there was no intervention to begin with. That's a natural progression. But the blame attached to that is on the students themselves. Well, you didn't achieve, so therefore you weren't that smart to begin with. Whereas we flip that to, well, what did you do when they were smart to begin with to help them to achieve? Oh, we expect them to do it themselves, with no materials and no resources and nothing to do that with. That seems a little bit not like it's going to have the desired effect in that context. In the same way that if you had somebody who was on grade 3 in the piano and music, you wouldn't say, well, you can wait 2 years to go to grade 4. You would immediately be starting them. If you have an athlete who's brilliant at running, you don't just say, well, you'll be 2 years running at this speed until you get older and then you can start running at a faster speed. You'll automatically investigate and push them on. Whereas academically, you won't be covering that for another 2 or 3 years, so wait. And therefore, that doesn't have the desired effect. So this is quite a long definition, but what it really is what I'm trying to explain is the model that we use now is actually called a talent development model. And what we're trying to say now, and it's part of this idea, is that progression in academic levels of giftedness is not, doesn't work. And then we have people we were testing when they were 6. It's something they were completely disinterested in, but they're brilliant at something that they're going to start doing when they're 12 or 13. But we've discarded them because we've IQ tested them at 6 and said you've an average, so you're not able for this higher level material. What we want to do is change that to a non-linear model of identification and an intervention-based model that at certain points people need certain things. And also we need to move away from the age-old, now thankfully I think we are finally doing this, but when I started in this field, I used to get a lot of, my child is really, really good at maths. And at every parent-teacher meeting I go to, the teacher says, but he's not very good at English. So therefore he's not gifted because, well, we just don't count maths on its own as gifted. Or the same way as my child's brilliant at languages, oh, but the teacher's constantly telling me he's not that good at maths, so therefore he's not gifted. Thankfully, that we've moved completely away from that. And we're very into what's called domain-specific giftedness. And it's kind of in line with what you were saying, because we've so many talented people out there, and we need certain domains where we need to upskill people very quickly to help us build our economy, to help us build a society, and to help us understand how resources are scarcer now, and we need expert people who can direct us in a way that's going to be helpful in the future. And that's very domain specific. Previously we used to move away from that. Oh, I don't want you to be good at maths because it's at the detriment of your other skills. We've discovered it's not at the detriment of your other skills, it's actually to the benefit of your other skills. Because if you're good at something, you should get opportunities to pursue that at a higher level. And that's the model that we're kind of using now, and I kind of like it because it integrates a few more modern thinking ideas around giftedness as opposed to IQ test at 6, and then if you don't make the cut then, you never will, and if you do, you'll stay the same forever, which we found is manifestly untrue. Okay, so 3 things, well, there's probably 3,000 things, but 3 things that come to mind the most when I work with these students are, and funnily enough, this slide hasn't changed in 30 years too much. These kind of things are the same. The circumstances and relation, the profile of the students may change, but a lot of these integral things still come up. The first thing is its ability rather than age. So the age-old kind of, I shouldn't have used age-old there, so the perennial excuse is used of well, you're too young to understand that. A 9-year-old wouldn't know how to do algebra. A 10-year-old couldn't understand trigonometry. An 11-year-old shouldn't be reading this book. A 12-year-old shouldn't be ready for doing applied physics. But the ability is saying that's not true. And the model that we're using in school is very much based on age-appropriate material. Now, age-appropriate is fine in the context of it not wanting to expose people to English stories that maybe they can wait until they're older to hear. But the general curriculum stuff is very much something that they are able to be exposed to and that they should have opportunities to study. And that's obviously the model and what we build everything we do on our programs. We need to value these students in school and outside. And this comes up so often in feedback that we get from parents and from the students themselves in relation to experiences at school. So they'll say, you know, okay, here's a question. John, can you answer this question? And John answers it. And then here's another question. Oh, John, you know the answer to that one. Oh, John, please don't answer any other questions now. Anybody else but John can answer the next question. And funny thing is, the next question is usually quite a difficult one and no one else knows the answer, but John's excluded from answering it because he's answered the two previous ones. And that's quite a common feedback, that their work is not as valued. And it's the same in relation to the feedback that they might get from assignments. So if you look at like, okay, I'll use 3 random names, my 3 sisters. So Mary, you got 70% in that history test. Mary, we are so pleased with that. You were doing great. Katrina, you got 65%. Katrina, that was a great effort. I'm really happy with how you're doing. You got 97%. Well, we expected that result from you, and you always get 97%. So if you look, the feedback that Katrina and Mary got was very positive and encouraging them to do well. And who did miles better than Katrina or Mary got very negative feedback, got an expectation that they were going to do well, got a value of, well, if you get 95, that wouldn't be great now, would it be, Anne? That's not really what we expect from you. And there was nothing positive except don't fall below 97 because that's where you're at. And nothing like encouraging her to do well or how she did on that and how that made her feel to do well at it. And it's the same probably as parents, because I do that all the time. Like my own son's like, what'd you get in the test? 99. Oh, where did you lose that 1%? You know, and then I always go, particularly when he's younger, I can't do it now, he's 16 now. When he tell me what he missed, I have no clue if that answer right. When he was like 8 or 9, oh, I know the answer to that. You know, like I would have got that one. But it's like when you think of it, it's such negative feedback because, particularly from a parent perspective, because your child is very much like, we've done a lot of studies on this, is like, you want your child to do well, but you want them not to think that you only like them because they get 99% in the test. Because it puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on them. Oh, I'm very worried to not do well because my parents won't like me anymore because they like me doing really, really well. And this presents them great challenges when the stuff gets harder. Because we might say, oh, we want you to pursue much more difficult material. And they're going, but I'm worried I won't do as well in it, and you won't like me then, because I won't be getting 99%. Because that's what our relationship is on me doing well in everything. We need to encourage effort rather than scoring. Because sometimes they can get 100% and things without ever making any effort. And that's not as valuable as something that they do get 70% in, but try really hard on, and that they work on. And we're saying great effort, because they'll try it again the next time, as opposed to, yeah, well, you got the thing, we expected that. They'll just try the same, or they'll worry about doing lesser that you mightn't feel as well about them. So value is important. And then finally, can't stress this enough, relation to the most kind of integral thing about what we try and do on our programs is to find peer groups for these students. And that's a very easy thing to misinterpret, because you could misinterpret that to go, well, you know, academically talented students are all socially inept. So therefore, they've got one thing, they've got that gift, it's at the expense of their social skills, God help them, but like, let's not give them anything too much in relation to that. That's not true. What actually happens is we have loads of bright students who are incredibly socially talented too, incredibly socially adept at lots of things. And then we have lots of bright students who struggle socially. And normally they struggle socially because their interests are different to what other people's interests are. So, like, if I kind of think of myself, right, I always throw it back to myself, like, so I would think, you know, when I was younger, I was very, obviously, technically, very academically talented, but I was very good at sports, right? And that was kind of, my parents were like, as well, obviously, look, I work at a university now, so they're very, want me to do well education. They were far more interested in how I was doing at sports than how I was doing academically. They were far more interested in me playing football, they were far more interested in that than my maths scores. Because that was such a socially acceptable pastime to be good at. And the better you got at it, the recognition was a good thing. And that if you were playing for a good team and you played for a better team, nobody's going to say, don't do that. Nobody's going to say, oh, you're getting recognised nationally or internationally as being a bad thing. Whereas with maths, what are you going to do with it, being very good at it at that age? And who's going to cheer you along the way to get other opportunities in it? Rather than say, oh, you big nerd, nobody's interested in what you're interested in, so therefore cut it out. You've no social skills. And that was kind of what happened there with this idea of peer group. And it's not just like people think, oh, I have an info mathematicians. I don't. Like, if you think of people who are very, like, normally high ability when you're younger, extended vocabulary is a very common trait, okay? I suppose a natural curiosity, but extended vocabulary is something that's very measurable because your vocabulary is better. So you can be like a girl, like a stereotype, who's got an extended vocabulary and starting school, and they use language that they use at home all the time, and their peers are going, what is this person talking about? I don't understand a word they're saying. I don't understand anything. And that person is automatically isolated because of that. And they'll go, I'm just going to talk to my other friends who don't use those words. And two things happen to that student. Commonly what happens is that they dumb down their language the next day and don't speak the words they speak at home to fit in with the group. But equally a number will go, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to speak as I normally will and stay isolated. And this is why these students don't have as many peer groups as other students. Because through no fault of their own, through something that they naturally do, they found themselves pushed to the side. And I think it's important that they need to meet other people who've read the same books as them, who have extended vocabulary, who are interested in the same things as them, or else they're going to feel as though I deserve to be isolated because I can't fit in socially. And that's where this myth comes of bright kids have no social skills, is because we've isolated them because they don't fit into what we perceive their social skills should be. So hopefully, this is to me, when I run these programs, and I'm so kind of invested in it, is the academic and social development is so important to move at the same time. That both things, like you're so much happier and confident and social, you'll do well academically, as opposed to doing it despite that. And it's funny, if you say to, it's very interesting, we might have like 100 students here who attended the program, and you would say, why would you come back next year? 99 would say, oh, because I meet my friends, social. And you go, well, you're studying medicine, you're doing law, you're doing, oh yeah, no, I'll take that, that's great, I love that as well. But I'm coming back because I made friends here, because my friends understand me and I have loads of friends. Friend, that's the feedback we get, particularly teenagers. And it's like, because I don't have as many friends in school, or because I can't talk about the things like philosophy in school that I can talk about here. The people aren't interested in the same quirky things that I am. And I think that that's a very nice thing, and that's definitely, I would find, particularly from my experience about multicultural, it's not very much, oh well, it's only a thing. It's very much everybody's integrated in that. And I think that that's very important, and it's like a really kind of a good byproduct of what we're trying to do. Okay. So, C2I, well, we started with cooperation with Johns Hopkins in 1992. So, really came about by one student. There was an Irish student who had a leave insert equivalency at 15. They didn't really know what to do. The kid was really good at maths. They'd run out of maths stuff for him. So they had a program in the States where he could have an extended maths program with other super smart maths kids. And he went and really enjoyed it. And they said, why don't we try and implement something like that in Ireland at our university? And the timing was really nice because the university had just kind of got university status and they wanted something a little bit different. And they were probably more innovative than the other universities at the time, who would be quite stayed in their ways relative to how this works or whatever, and change it. So the university were like, why don't we try something like this? So literally from that, we suddenly now have like from one student with 6,000 students a year that it really caught on. And we have like primary school students, TY students, summer course secondary school students, and we really have high demand post-COVID. We found that COVID was kind of okay for us because a lot of people signed up online and took courses when they weren't available, and a lot of students during COVID were very, bereft of any academic challenge. This is good. But a few people withdrew and couldn't, had online fatigue, I think is the expression that we're using. So since it's gone back to face-to-face, we've had so unprecedented demand and people who are really hungry for it because they missed it for a couple of years. And we have centres around the country that we kind of found that people were coming from Cork and Galway to Dublin. It's grand if you're staying residentially, but on Saturday morning and leaving their house at 4 a.m. And it's not really conducive to learning to do that. It seems like a punishment. So what we wanted them to do was set up centres in University College Cork, in University of Galway. They keep changing the name. I think it's called the University of Galway now, in Sligo. Okay. So places where we had students, we set up Saturday classes, and it's been quite successful. And now I currently have 10 full-time staff. I have 2 PhD students, Babaswaria, and another one who's looking at teacher practice. We have 250 part-time staff, teachers, teaching assistants, and residential staff. So it's the great thing. The reason I use that slide is not to say, oh my God, we're so big, is literally, I would say 80% of our part-time staff are former students of the programme. That is hugely important because they can empathise with the experiences of the students who've been on it. Yeah. They can understand why you would come, what you get out of it, and also they're great role models as giving something back. And they're usually doing something wonderful or brilliant. I remember it was funny when I would go and approve the contracts that are coming in for our summer staff, And so, I'd be kind of approving them. And then they have to be approved over by my boss, who's the deputy president. And I remember meeting her the other day going, how did these people have the CV at 21? At 21, I was finishing college. My CV was a half a page long. These have won the Young Scientist. They have done this. They are, have been to Harvard on a, panel. For it's just they've done so many different things. And it's so brilliant to see. And it's it was actually, I was really interested because it was showed that she was reading the CVs that were coming through, but also going, wow, that's such a great experience. These people have had great experiences and they have to be brilliant role models for the next generation. So it's very nice. And particularly, I think initially it used to be, the great thing about hiring former students is that they'll understand why you would want to come on a course like this. When we're interviewing them, we'll say, when you were 10, what would you have liked to have known about computers? What would you have liked to have known about law? And if they can't answer that, then they're not really in tune with what a 10-year-old's thinking. Whereas we just go, oh my God, I'd love to have heard about the court and that decision, and they're integrating that into their lectures. And they're really going, as opposed to people, I think external going, why would you go to school in the summer? Why would you go to school on Saturday? But it's not like that. It's much more, the parents' feedback will be, Monday to Friday school, it's a torture getting them to get dressed, to get out, they're all glum. Saturday morning, they're ready at the door an hour before the class. That's the difference. It's not a punishment. This is their excitement and look forward to the week. Okay. So, identification. Gosh, I didn't want to do identification that much. Okay, so the reason I do identification is that how do I identify gifted students, which is quite difficult really, and we're changing the models all the time. But I usually do it that we're trying to look at people who are in the top 5% of the population. That's a generally good, that's it's measurable, we can look at it. The top 5% is, there's 1 in 20, so it's not 1 in 10,000, which people perceive it to be. 1 in 20, there's 1 in the room. Probably me, but anyway. No, this is an exceptional room. There's 19 and 20 in this room. Okay? It's to pick the one who it isn't. Yeah. So, no, 1 in 20 is measurable in a class. There's always going to be 1 or 2. Yeah. And it's a good thing because there's a high proportion of them in the country. And it's usually a thing like the department sometimes uses top 10%. So look, I'm more I don't have a very rigid identification profile. I'm much more, if they're near, we should let them on. If they're motivated and want to come, that's a good thing. So it's not as, exclusive, but we have to have a cut-off because we have to have students who are at a level who can understand and take in the material, which is going to be challenging, which they find in school that when it gets like that, the teacher doesn't want to do it, or the other students withdraw from it and they never get a chance to study it. So that's why we have cut-offs and identification. And the reason I say about identification now is in relation to this domain-specific thing, is that people were thinking, oh, you need to identify people who are good at everything. We categorically don't need to identify people. Well, there are people who are good at everything, we hate them all. But we categorically don't need to identify them. We need to identify people who are good at certain things. And we need to go and get them to push them in those areas and to broaden their skills. And that's so important, as opposed to, oh, well, you know, I'm brilliant at maths, but I go to CTYI to get my verbal skills up. Why would you do that? That is such a waste. You should be going to push your maths on. And sure, you're pushing your verbal skills on with people who are miles better than you. That seems like a punishment. That doesn't seem like fun. The fun part is doing stuff with other people who are the same ability as yourself and pushing yourself on. And that's what helps. So courses and classes, I think I mentioned them. Medicine, law, engineering, programming, psychology are popular. Like, obviously, you know, you have to, like, the great thing about working in university is that, you know, we can follow trends and what people like, and we ask the students themselves what do they like studying. Like, obviously, traditional ones like medicine are always going to be popular, you know, law, things like that, where there's recognised professions attached to them, which are prestigious courses and stuff. But the important thing I kind of find with the students is that the career guidance that they get in school is very limited. It's very limited to you're very brainy, so therefore take the course with the top points. And it may not be any way suited to their skill set. And we've talked to a lot of guidance counsellors about that, and they just don't really know how to do guidance counselling with bright kids because they've got a lot of potential to do stuff, so they just tell them to do the thing that's the hardest to get into. And that, like, in what other way of life would you ever make that decision? You know, you would definitely make a decision is pick the one that's the most interesting to you, that you might find you're going to enjoy studying, as opposed to, yeah, I think you should do medicine, but I'm kind of terrified of blood. You'll get over it. You know, like, well, maybe you won't. Or how have you taught that through? And I'm always trying to empower students now, and I think universities like DCU is very good for that, for kind of talking, you know, looking at different modules and going, oh, you know, I've always wanted to study theoretical physics because I liked watching a program about it a few years ago. It's just like, you do know there's a lot of maths and that. No, is there? It's just like, yeah, it wasn't on the program. That was because they simplified it. But yeah, in a degree for theoretical physics, there would be a lot of maths. So maybe you should maybe look at what you're going to study before. And I think that sometimes people just assume bright kids have done all that, but they haven't. So sometimes you have to kind of go, investigate yourself, find out what you're good at, but also without putting too much pressure on them. Because I think sometimes we're like, I remember I was talking to a parent of a student, just recently, who's a C2I student, who just got the scholars in Trinity, you know, like the top scholarship award, and they're studying biomedical engineering. So, you know, you could probably find out who that person is. But the father of that student is so disappointed that daughter didn't do medicine. And when I was like talking to him recently, he was like, it's such a shame she didn't do medicine. It's like, but she just got the scholars in Trinity. That's the highest academic honour you can get in the country. But no, I'm disappointed that she didn't do medicine. It's like, wow, you know, I wouldn't be as disappointed. Like, you know, I think, you know, I'd be more thinking, well, she did quite well there. That's quite competitive, you know. So, but it's interesting. It's a perception. And I think that sometimes we have to kind of like step back and go, let your kids at it, you know what I mean? Like my own son, like, would just drive me absolutely bonkers that way, you know? Yeah, I'll do it, you know what I mean? It's like, when will you do it? When? Please tell me. So, oh no, I'll get it done. So anyway, I'm just leaving him to it now. So, that's kind of it. So I'm just saying a couple of the programs that we run. We have TY programs, which are very good because the TY students can come and take actual university modules while they're still at TY. So they're released from the school 1 day a week. So my son is doing maths at the moment. There's engineering, there's various degree courses. They take a couple of modules in them. It's very nice. They're a bit older. It's good for their choice laterally. They're more independent, and it's good for them to kind of make their own way to a university, take the courses, go home themselves, as opposed to being spoon-fed everything and learn this off by heart. They have to kind of learn different methods and ways of acquiring and retaining information. It's nice. Okay, so the academic benefits of these type of courses, and please tell me to stop talking anytime soon. This one's kind of important now. Look, the main thing is you're going to get access to subjects you're not going to do in school. It's a great benefit of a university. We have like these broad courses which are, tailored to the age of the particular student. We're not just going to say a 6-year-old should be able to learn trigonometry overnight. We're going to try and tailor engineering to something like bridge building or something they'd be interested in. That's a skill that will be useful for them laterally, that will extend their spatial ability that they may never do at school. So that's the idea. Subjects wouldn't do at school. The depth is important too. I think that a lot of the feedback we get from parents and from kids in school is like, just when it was getting interesting, the teachers said we're finished with that topic. Or we've learned enough about that. And it's like, but I have lots of questions though, but we won't be covering them. So they need the depth to understand behind what their opinions and details are. I think trying new things is good too, because you can always be, you're the maths guy, you're the science girl, you know what I mean? Well, maybe try something else, like rather than fulfilling that prophecy because your parents studied science in college or your dad is a, consultant radiologist, therefore you have to be one. Of course, if that's what you want to do that, but try things rather than that being a self-fulfilling prophecy and you being, gosh, why did I follow in that path when I could have done so many things? And the pace is quicker. I think that, look, I'm hugely sympathetic. I work in a university and, we have a teacher training institute, which is a really good one. And now, exactly as the Ambassador said, there's so many profiles as needs within each individual student, from academically, from their mental health, from their social, from their difficulties. And each teacher has to have a profile of each individual student, which is nearly impossible. So therefore, the pace has to suffer for that. And if you've noticed from the PISA results, which are lauded a lot, but okay, so you can certainly go, PISA is not the be-all and end-all. But it's very interesting. The PISA results are very positively reported in the newspaper because we very few numbers, with good high literacy and high numeracy. But we also have very few people at level 5 or above on PISA because the whole kind of policy was to improve literacy and numeracy. But that's to the point of contingency-based learning. You've learnt it, therefore it's finished. So once you achieve criteria-based learning, once you achieve the criteria, you've done it. You're not going to get anything extra. So you have students who have high ability who've achieved the criteria in September of the year at school. And they're not going to learn anything till the next year because we have to wait until everyone else reaches the criteria, which I don't think is a bad thing, but certainly not at the expense of the individual student who knows it already. But that's how these tables are devised. We need to make sure everybody has the literacy and numeracy. You've got it, look at you, but please wait until the others catch up. Even when I think of it myself, and I think I'm very patient, that doesn't sound great. If I was 9, I'd think it would sound terrible. I'd really not like it, and I would not be looking forward to school in October or November or December because of it. So therefore, but these are the feedback that a lot of bright students get all the time, which is considered completely acceptable, but you wouldn't give it to any other student. You wouldn't tell somebody who was struggling to learn, well, you can't come to school until you've learnt it, until you know what he knows. Why would you ever do that? So reversing it by going, you're not going to learn anything until they know it, seems, draconian in the first sense. Social benefits, I talked about them a little bit. Like-minded students, trying at universities when you're younger. Confidence, I think we've done a lot of research on the benefits of these programs for people's confidence, and you can't undermine that in any way. You see these people coming in, young people, and they won't make eye contact with you, and they're really nervous, and they're really worried about what's going to happen. And at the end of the course, they are 10 people around them, they're really friendly, they're really great, they're talking about how much they enjoyed it. And it's such a positive thing to see that that's happened. And we facilitate it happening. The students themselves make it happen. But that is something that really, definitely gives them more inspiration to do better things when they go back to school, as opposed to being miserable all year round and nobody to help me. It's great to go, wow, I have this little network of support now. People who understand what I'm going through, and I can use that to achieve better when I go back to school. And then hopefully support from staff, as I said, who are many former students, and from things. I think that particularly teenage years, peer acceptance is the key thing. And I think that if you're in a school where you're just not feeling that, it can be a very lonely experience, and it's very nice. And one of the great legacies of these type of programs is the high level of peer acceptance, regardless of the difference of the particular student. And I think the ones who probably are the most isolated and have the most challenges in school are the most, like, they reinvent themselves completely on these courses and become the most popular. And wow, it's so great for them. It's like a transformation, and it's great when you talk to their parents, and it's like, you know, like, this is the first time I've seen my son since I remember him when he was happy, which was 5 years ago. Or my daughter, when she used to really be such a happy child, and now look, she hasn't smiled like in 2 years. This is great to see. She's finally found a tribe of people where she feels comfortable. So, like, you can't, that's what I'm saying, like, these two things are definitely conducive to that person making better choices when they get older and becoming more kind of, you know, a better member of society and being more fulfilled and happy. Okay, sure, you can tell me about this. I really have to mention this, is like the real growth in these students. And it's good from I can definitely identify and understand it myself, because I literally experienced it. Like 30 years ago, when I started, gosh, that's a long time ago, there was literally no students who were twice exceptional. There were, but none of them were coming on these programs. None of them were being identified. None of them were being put forward. So then about 20 years ago, little ones or twos came up, you know. Some psychologist, I've got this really weird profile student, what do you think? It's like, yeah, try them, you know. But again, so few. Now they make up 20% of the general gifted population. They always did, but we never identified them before. And the reason now is that NEPs and places are sending them to reports earlier, early intervention. We're finding out more about them. There's probably a lot of like high ability students with autism, high functioning autism, probably surviving on these type of programs without the autism being identified, but ultimately not doing as well because of the non-identification of the autism and not having the proper interventions at university or in a workplace. Whereas we've changed that slightly to now integrating and early interventions and learning self-regulatory techniques that help that. But I think that that's so important that these students are on these programs, because if you think of something like dyslexia, it's a difficult one to manage for people. We had so many high ability students who were not identified for dyslexia because they weren't dyslexic enough. And what was happening was that the high ability was compensating for the dyslexia. So what was happening was they were taking these standardized tests and scoring in the middle. And their teachers were perceiving them as being lazy because, well, you could do better, but you don't seem to do better. They weren't being identified for any dyslexia because they were 30% above the cutoff for dyslexia. So this student was having such a struggle to maintain a middle ground that was so challenging for them because they were masking a learning difficulty, and their reward for it was being, well, you're quite lazy, really, aren't you? When they were probably absolutely working twice as hard as a high ability student without dyslexia. So the identification of them are important. Obviously identification of ASD kids, UT and ADHD kids, who I remember from my schooling days were just told to sit outside the classroom. You know, the teacher would come in, you out, and that was before they'd even said anything, and you're just going, that was an acceptable way of working with ADHD students then. Just get out, like, well, we can't handle you in here. So again, these are thankful things that we've changed, but we need to have these on these type of programs, and we need to embrace that, and we need to research it more because it's so under-researched, because all the research is done on individual students. So this is the great benefit of having these programs with large numbers of them, so that we can make more, you know, everyone, like, if I read another paper about one person, like, it's very difficult to make, you know, subjective judgments on one particular objective, just on one particular person's experiences, which are important, but it's very hard to write policy on that person because their background could be so different than what the next person is. So we want commonalities and those things. Okay. Disadvantage too, it's the same thing. 30 years ago, I did a study 30 years ago, you know, looking at like what level of qualification parents had for people coming on the program, and I found out like it was quite common that one of the parents had a degree, which again, like, you kind of think that's not a really groundbreaking, strange thing to find. But again, none of those students were disadvantaged. All of them were coming from middle class schools. None of the disadvantaged students were being identified or put forward. So we had to go back into those communities to tell them, look, there's usually smart kids in your school, but it's like, oh no, but like, we're not that type of school, or we wouldn't have any gifted students. Of course you do. Like, you just have to kind of look for them and find them. And sometimes they're a little bit behind your regular gifted students because they haven't been exposed at home to their brother going to college or their parents having access to loads of books and materials and resources. So therefore, that makes their learning profile a little bit slower. But it doesn't mean they're not super smart, because they're making other challenges and doing well in that. So it's usually important to identify these for these type of programs. I think it became common in the States with the under-identification of black students, the under-identification of Hispanic students, the under-identification of minority students, and community groups representing these came and said, you know, we need more of these students on the program, which rightfully so, and thankfully that got it into notice. But in Europe, you know, it just kind of dwindled away a little bit, and there's very little good research on, and it's hugely topical and important nowadays when it's in the paper every day related to minorities. So we need to kind of have more positive spins on what minority students can do to help communities and stuff, and like just leaving them in programs and not identifying them is not helpful. So we find like it's interesting, the number of Eastern European students we have on the course now whose parents so want them to do these type of courses is really interesting compared to 10, 15 years ago. We didn't have that many in the country, there was none on the programme. So again, we've done research, looked at those things, and I think it's interesting. I just kind of like, anecdotally, I hate telling these anecdotal stories, it's better to tell a research story which is basic thing, but anecdotally, like, and this comes from a particular student who I knew from disadvantage, who was in a really like grade 1 disadvantaged school beside the university, and was really incredibly smart female student, and she wanted to go to university and she wanted to study nursing, and that was great. But like, she tried medicine at the course and she was like, you know, the only reason, and this is no disrespect to anyone doing nursing, is I think I can do nursing is because I thought medicine was going to be too hard, because everybody told me I wouldn't be able for it. But I'm well able for it. Look, I'm doing as well as everyone in that class, and that student now is like a surgeon. You know, like that's really like kind of messages that they're getting is you're not able for that, or you can't do that. And they're from people who you trust, from your teachers, from your guidance counsellors, from your parents. That's not great. We need to kind of expand those things. So that's why disadvantaged students on programs are hugely significant. Okay, I'll do a couple more on research. I really got interested in research since about 2010. I just think it's so important. Like, we're so fortunate to have access to so many students of so many different varieties and capacities, and it's really a failing if we don't do proper research on them, with them, on them, to sound very painful. You know, we don't find out more about their needs, we don't find out more about what they want, we don't find out more about what can help them. So, as I said, I just recently supervised a former supervised student who works for me on gifted LGBTQ, Shwari's doing ASD, and my own work on the secretary for the European Council for High Ability, and I'm on a couple of boards relative to that. So I work kind of in research with people who I think are like-minded in relation to what they want to find or what they want to do, and not as driven by, oh, well, we can only get tenders for government to do this type of research, and it's just like, well, this isn't what I'm interested in. I want to look at these. So if I have a few like-minded people and we do some research together, it's kind of cool, I think. Yes, we've published millions of books and loads of stuff, so sorry, that's why I'm great. Slide. Okay. I have to, I'll talk a bit about that. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'll finish on this slide, right? Teacher training, I was going to say, look, I've designed a few teacher training courses. They're all free and available online. One was a European project. It was a really nice integration with a lot of European countries. It's a really interesting project. It's good for teachers. It's free, obviously, because it's a European project. I also was commissioned by the European Commission this summer to do another one, which is a smaller one. I did that too. So they're all free and available online. If anyone wants to see about teacher training, you know, look, what we're trying to do, and that is everything I talked about there, to get teachers to understand a bit more so that they'll make better decisions working with kids. And I think that that's kind of what teacher training trying to do is, and also to get that more at initial teacher training level, so that we found the research has shown that teachers who get benefit or exposure to gifted when they're initial teacher training will teach them better when they become teachers. It seems like it's obvious, but believe me, it's not as obvious. So, acceleration works. That's the first thing, okay? A lot of people are very reluctant to accelerate kids because of the social effects that that might have on the child. There are a million research papers literally on acceleration. Universally, the only piece of research that is universally the same results, that regardless of what happens, the academic experience is very good and the social experience is totally fine. And all of these negative things are based on basically what used to happen 30 years ago, sending 12-year-olds to university with 19-year-olds with no support structure or system in place, and willing them to drop out after a year because they couldn't handle it socially. Of course they couldn't handle it socially. They're 12 in an environment with 19-year-olds with no support. That's not acceleration. That is criminal. You know what I mean? Acceleration is pushing somebody ahead a year or two in maths. It's giving people exposure to advanced material. It's not sending them to child cruelty camp. Do you know what I mean? So that's the kind of thing. And again, everybody anecdotally remembers the 12-year-old who dropped out of college and became a drug addict. You know, like, that's not a real kind of story in relation to that. Training, I talked about that. The heterogeneous, that's so important. We really have to move away from this one-size-fits-all model. I talked about the twice exceptional, the disadvantage, the ones who might have challenges with their mental health, the ones who have anxiety, the ones who have difficulties integrating into bigger groups. There's so many things to remember and so many things to try and mould for giftedness rather than just thinking of it as being one-size-fits-all, and that's so important. The other thing as well is that teachers and parents need to be aware that not all high ability students excel all the time. I think we talked about this expectation. You got 97, we expected that from you. Many gifted students underachieve at various levels. Sometimes it's because of peer pressure with girls. Well, you're not going to be in the cool group if you keep getting the top marks, so therefore I'll stop getting them. Sometimes it's teacher pressure. Well, you know, you're not doing as well as you did last year. You should be doing a bit better. And that causes things. Sometimes it's parental pressure. Sometimes it's growing up and wondering, why do you fit in the world? And this is all, doesn't feel like I like it as much as I did when I was 9. All of these are normal levels of things. We can't expect them to do well all the time. We think of ourselves, some days we're much better than others, or we perform better. So expecting gifted kids to perform well all the time without looking at why they may not be is not going to be conducive to good results. And the research that we did it with like 1,000 students, and we found that like 30% would struggle with achievement, with their perceptions of being bright, with struggling to live up to their ability, with negative connotations from peers or from things, and being very difficult to deal with that. I said let's look at like sometimes like it's very interesting. I was interviewed for the TV during the week on Nationwide, which I think now is the culmination of my career, right? You know, like I could have like published millions of books or whatever, but if I'm going to be on RT1 on Nationwide, that's it. Like I could just retire now. I know that everyone in my family is going to watch it and be so excited, right? But like, okay, so I was interviewed for Nationwide, but like the questions they were asking were so not gifted 2.0 questions. They were so obsessed with identification and how do you find them and how smart are you? And it's just like, that's not what we need to be asking. Because, okay, I agree, identification is problematic because we get a lot of false negatives. Okay, so we get like people who should have been on it, but we didn't get them on the test. That's problematic. But we don't regularly get false positives. The ones we get are actually kind of smart. Maybe there's smart ones out there we don't get. But we shouldn't be over-tagged on identification and what we do to identify, because it's changing and it's moving along all the time. So being over-worried about that aspect of it just means you never get the project off the ground. And as I said, talent development, that's the way to go. It's looking at a non-linear approach it's feeling that different people at different times require different interventions, and they're not the same. So sometimes people require a harder push at a younger age, ease up. Sometimes people get much better when they learn stuff and go, wow, now I understand this a lot better. I didn't know about this when I was younger, and up to now I understand it. Just dismissing them because they didn't understand it when they were 6 and the super smart ones did means they can't be ever exposed to it. There's so many late developers out there who are quite motivated to do well. I find that quite interesting. I was looking at my class in college. The ones who ultimately did the best were definitely the ones below the top 10 or 20. People like me. Who was in like the bottom 10 or 20. So, no, I definitely think when you think of it, you understand stuff a lot better as you get older towards things like, and I definitely feel it's like in terms of managing people, in terms of these type of things, you just, sometimes you're in a crazy rush when you're younger to do well and to prove yourself and to do, but definitely there's a huge hindsight to, oh, I've actually done that before and I understand it much more now. Or I see now where that person's coming from when I didn't understand it. When I was 19, 20, they were just in my way. Now I see why they're like that. So I do think that we have to be much less linear in our way of how we kind of have interventions and how we look at the positive nature of them. I think I'm being silenced now, but that's okay. Me, as somebody who loves to sound my own voice. I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I've really enjoyed it anyway. But then, as I said, I do like talking. But it is brilliant. As I said, I was so happy to get the invitation. Thank you so much. I particularly think, exactly as you said, there's 80,000 Indian people living in Ireland, that they've played a very important part in the development of this programme. That from day one, we've always had students who have been on it. We've had staff members, we've had different things. And I definitely think that there's a huge, good connection of learning there. And that's why I'd be delighted to do these talks, to talk about future collaborations and stuff, because I think there's so much scope for that. And that definitely we're on the same path, because sometimes, you would have other countries where it's so different, and this is not like their reasons or rationale for wanting to be on these programs are so different than what I would perceive as important. Whereas I definitely feel, particularly with Indian students, they're very much visioning the way that I like it to develop, and they contribute greatly to moving that on and making that important, because it can't just be, what would be your traditional Irish student. I think that that's not the model that we should be looking at anymore. So thank you so much for the invitation and for your kind words.